The Lord is with you.
And also with you.
My brothers and sisters, this is a proclamation of the Holy Gospel as we find in the tradition of St. Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
On that day, as evening drew on, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross to the other side of the lake." Leaving the crowd, they took Jesus with them and got into the boat that was there. A violent storm came up, and the waves were breaking over the bow, so that it was already filling up. Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. They woke him and said, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up, rebuked the wind and the sea. "Be quiet, be still." The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why were you terrified? Do you not have faith yet?" They were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey?" This is the gospel, the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
If you have ever seen a map of Israel, the Sea of Galilee is almost in the middle of the northern part, and it's the largest body of water that you would find in the country. It is from that body of water that the Jordan River takes its source, and even above that body of water to the hills of Lebanon. As I said, it's a large body of water, but by any means, it's not the largest body of water that we'd be associated with. Our Great Lakes would swallow that up in no time. But we have to remember that these were not traveling people. These were people who probably didn't move maybe 5 or 6 miles from where they were born. And so many of them may never have seen the Mediterranean Sea on their own coast. But regardless as it was, we see this story of Jesus and his disciples going to the other side of the lake, probably getting away from the crowd, probably attempting to find some time alone to reflect and to pray. And they get into a boat, and this great squall, this great storm breaks upon the sea, which was common. Because the Sea of Galilee is in between two hill ridges, one of the Galilee on the west side and the hills of Lebanon on the west. And so here they are caught in this storm. As I was reading a commentary this afternoon on this particular piece from Mark's Gospel, the commentator said, it's interesting to note that these are seasoned fishermen. These are individuals who are familiar with this lake. They made their living on this lake. And yet we see that they were terrified at this storm. He goes on to say, it's also interesting that we would have such a detail to say that Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. Now, what would a cushion be doing in a fishing boat? And the commentator goes on to say that he wanted this to be an eyewitness account. But we know it is not. It's a story. It's a story that portrays a deeper meaning than just what we're reading here. It's interesting. It says here, Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Be quiet, be still." And those verbs were the same used when he healed the demoniac, to drive out the evil possession of an individual. The individual said, "We know who you are. You are the anointed of God." He said, "Be quiet, be still, and leave this man." And so we have relationships being built on these stories with other events in the life of Jesus. And they are done so that people would begin to understand that Jesus does have the command of nature, of the storm, of the wind, as well as he has over evil. I've never been in a storm at sea. And probably the best example that I could relate to was that movie several years ago with George Clooney, A Perfect Storm. And even though most of that was filmed within a laboratory where the waves were being generated, it got me thinking of how terrible a small vessel must be in that chaotic sea with wind and rain. And yet we look at our Great Lakes and Lake Michigan with the those tankers that go across, that sail those Great Lakes, and the one that broke up.
The John D.
Yes, thank you. And lost all hands, went down. And this is a lake that we call Lake, it's a large lake, but still, we see that this is a very powerful event. And it harkens to what we read in Genesis. It harkens to what we read in Genesis in the first pages of the book of Genesis, where it talks about, and the world was a formless mass. It was chaos. And here Mark makes that relationship of Jesus being able to control that chaos that can take place. And why is this important? Probably any one of us could talk about a period of time when we did not have a sure footing in our lives. Wherever we went, whatever we touched, wherever we stepped, seemed like a quagmire. And it did not seem that we were able to move or to endure. And in that chaos of our lives, many of us may have turned to prayer, may have turned to God and said, "Is it not a concern of yours that we're going down?" I remember before I moved down here, I was an associate pastor at St. Vincent Martyr Parish in Madison, New Jersey. And I was no stranger to that parish, as a very, very dear friend of mine, Father Joseph, was an associate, and I was there any number of times visiting him. Not this Father Joseph, another Father Joseph, Fortuna, his last name was. And as it would happen, Joe died of cancer and was buried in the pre-circle of this parish. And for a great number of years, I was not able to go to to the cemetery. I would avoid it like the plague. But God, being the whimsical God that he or she is, I was transferred to St. Vincent's, and I was made the director of the cemetery. And I remember there are times when I would be in the midst of some kind of a turmoil, whether it be in the parish, whether it be in the cemetery. I don't believe that the dead don't come back to haunt you. They do, in the living. So don't believe that. They come back. Anyway, and I would go down to the grave, to Joe's grave, and I would stamp on it and say, "What's the matter with you? Don't you see what's going on? Don't you have any power to help us down here or up here or wherever we are?" And it would seem that I would be getting some sense of peace, at least stamping my foot on the ground and getting some of the energy out because of what was going on. But many times we turn to those things that are familiar to us, whether they're a long-gone grandparent, maybe it's a best friend, maybe it's a statue of Mary that we have in our home, whatever it might be. But we turn to that which is familiar and comforting and say, does it not bother you that I'm going down? Then all of a sudden something happens, and sometimes we don't make the equation, we don't put it together. Then all of a sudden I find myself finding the rocks that I need to stand on. Finding a path that is not strewn with things to make me stumble. And finally, I find that the chaos that had invaded my life is now coming to an end. Yes, the disciples probably overstepped their bounds when they said, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus knew. What are you all upset about? You've seen the miracles that I can work. You think I don't have the power to calm the sea, to still the wind? Have faith. And that's where we fail. That's where we fail, because we don't have faith. We do not believe that Jesus can accomplish in our lives those things that we need. And so we go through our lives